Imagine a plant that you plant once and it keeps feeding you for a lifetime. Not just one season, not just one harvest, but year after year silently producing food without fertilizer, without irrigation systems, without chemicals. A tree that grows in silence drops its fruit into waiting hands and nourished entire nations long before modern agriculture existed. Yet, you've likely never heard of it. How does something so powerful, so reliable, so life-sustaining vanish from our history books? How did we go from depending on it for survival to forgetting its name? Why isn't this miracle food on supermarket shelves today? Why aren't governments planting forests of it in famine zones? Why don't schools teach us about it? Who decided that this plant capable of ending hunger didn't deserve its place in our future? Tonight, we uncover the truth behind the crop that feeds you once and feeds you forever. Because something or someone made sure you would never know about it. Let's begin with its nature. It isn't a grain, it isn't a vegetable, it isn't a root or a seed, it is a tree. A perennial food tree that produces up to 200 kilograms of food every year once it matures. It thrives in extreme heat, it survives drought. It grows in volcanic soil, poor soil, sandy soil, sometimes even no soil at all. Just one tree can feed a family for 50 years. Its fruit can be eaten fresh, roasted, baked, mashed, or fermented. It stores calories like potatoes, digests like bread, and nourishes like rice. Ancient navigators carried it on ships. Warriors dried it for journeys. Mothers cooked it for the sick. This crop was their life insurance policy. But here's the strange part, very few of us today even recognize it, despite its potential to replace wheat, rice, corn, and potatoes. We've replaced forests of this food tree with lawns, concrete, and decorative landscaping. And you're about to learn its name. The world once called it breadfruit. To understand breadfruit's story, we must sail back thousands of years to the islands of Oceania and Polynesia, modern-day Samoa, Fiji, and Hawaii. Here, breadfruit wasn't just food, it was culture, identity, and survival. These island civilizations didn't grow endless fields of crops. Instead, they planted breadfruit orchards near villages, temples, on cliffsides, and along shorelines. When a child was born, families planted a breadfruit tree for them, symbolizing that life would always provide. Each tree was named, each harvest was celebrated, priests blessed them during rituals. People stored fermented breadfruit in underground pits of food reserves that could last years, insurance against storms, drought, or war. And as these islanders voyaged across the Pacific, they carried saplings and root shoots to every new land they settled. Breadfruit wasn't just a crop, it was a map of migration. From Tahiti to Micronesia, the Caribbean to parts of Southeast Asia, it spread through ancient navigation routes, and for centuries it worked. Empires rose around it, communities flourished. No one starved because the trees simply kept feeding them. But history has a habit of changing course, especially when new powers arrive. And for breadfruit, that turning point came with colonization. By the 1700s, Europeans finally noticed something extraordinary. On Pacific Islands, famine was rare. Food forests existed without plows or fertilizers. People lived longer, stronger, and healthier, powered by a crop that required almost no labor. European explorers were stunned. A single breadfruit tree could produce 800 fruits a year, and once planted, it fed entire villages for generations. British botanists began calculating if this tree could feed ships, soldiers, enslaved labor colonies, and plantations, it might become the cheapest food source on Earth. So they began collecting seedlings and transporting them across oceans to Jamaica, St. Vincent, Trinidad, and the wider Caribbean, believing breadfruit could transform agriculture forever. Industrialists envisioned vast plantations where food simply grew itself, eliminating the cost of sowing, tilling, irrigation, and labor. But something unexpected happened. People already enslaved on plantations refused to eat breadfruit. To them, it symbolized control, their colonizers' way to feed them cheaply and keep them dependent. Breadfruit, once sacred, was now tied to oppression, not survival, and that connection would become the start of its downfall. Instead of becoming humanity's food salvation, breadfruit was rejected in the Caribbean. Plantations returned to imported grains. Elites favored wheat and rice, foods linked to status, not resilience. Meanwhile, rising colonial governments pushed cash crops they could export: sugar, cotton, tobacco, not trees that fed their populations independently. Industrial farming took over. Annual crops replaced perennial ones. Machines replaced forests. Breadfruit, a self-producing, community-sustaining food, was now seen as a threat, not a product. Governments never invested in it. Universities barely studied it. Agricultural corporations ignored it because selling seeds, fertilizers, and machinery is far more profitable than a tree that feeds you for free. Breadfruit faded from memory in less than a century. People who once grew it died. Younger voices never heard its name. A food that could end hunger was quietly pushed into extinction, or so it seemed. Breadfruit didn't disappear by accident. It vanished because the world changed its priorities. Industrial agriculture didn't want food that grows forever. They wanted food you must plant again and again and again because that model sells seeds, fertilizer, machinery, and patents. Breadfruit was too efficient. It threatened the economics of agriculture. Why invest in tractors, irrigation projects, chemical inputs, or annual crop cycles when a single tree produces food for decades? Colonial powers preferred crops they could export, cash crops like sugar, tobacco, coffee, cotton. They flooded islands with these plantations, pushing out local food forests. Governments followed suit. Universities prioritized controllable agriculture, not trees that gave people food freedom. As monoculture spread, breadfruit orchards were cut down, replaced with factories, ports, and concrete. Generations grew up never tasting it. And because it wasn't part of commercial supply chains, no advertisements promoted it, no supermarkets stocked it. No policymakers funded it. The disappearance wasn't a conspiracy written in documents. It was a system of incentives, a world where free food had no market value, therefore no existence. Breadfruit wasn't erased because it failed. It was erased because it succeeded too well, within just a few decades. Breadfruit, once sacred, became invisible. Children grew up not recognizing the fruit hanging on trees. Cities expanded over old orchards. People began importing food they once grew at their doorstep. Ask someone today about breadfruit and most will simply shrug. It became a ghost crop. Present in scattered yards but unknown to the people living beside it. Even in regions where it once fed entire nations, its role was replaced by rice, flour, instant noodles, and processed goods transported from across the world. Schools didn't teach its value. Governments didn't replant it. Farmers didn't inherit the knowledge. What was once daily nourishment turned into a story and then into silence. A food that could have ended hunger was almost forgotten, almost, because nature has a way of returning when we need it most. In recent years, a quiet movement began. Climate researchers noticed islands with breadfruit trees were less affected by food shortages. Nutritionists discovered it has more fiber than rice, more potassium than bananas, and feeds gut health better than wheat. Permaculture communities documented that breadfruit fixes damaged soil, supports biodiversity, and thrives without human intervention. Then survivalist groups caught on, calling it the doomsday tree because it grows once and keeps feeding you forever. Caribbean communities began reviving old recipes. Pacific farmers started planting orchards again. Hawaii founded breadfruit research institutes, mapping ancient varieties lost to time. Universities are now sequencing its genetics. NGOs are distributing saplings to fight hunger in remote regions. Governments in Africa and Central America are planting thousands of trees as climate-resilient food banks. Breadfruit is returning not because someone promoted it, but because people need it again. The world is rediscovering what ancient cultures always knew. Food security grew on trees, we just forgot to look. Today, as droughts worsen, as soil erodes, as prices rise, as global supply chains collapse, breadfruit stands exactly where humanity needs it. Heavy checkmark, it survives heat waves. Heavy checkmark, it doesn't require yearly planting. Heavy checkmark, it thrives in disasters. Heavy checkmark, it restores degraded soil. Heavy checkmark, it provides carbs, protein, vitamins, fiber. 1 tree can feed a family. 10 trees can support a village. 1,000 trees can feed a region through crisis. Breadfruit isn't just food, it is resilience encoded in nature.